Yo, I'm Mat4yo, and welcome to the Chisel Lounge. Today we're going to talk about something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I've been hoping to do a video about it eventually, someday. And here we finally are. I'm going to pit up original video game music against its remastered, remade counterparts. Obviously, we're going to be focusing on Pokemon because that is my specialty here. I'm going to be looking at these original songs and then how they were interpreted in future iterations such as remakes and remasters. And one more thing to keep in mind is that when composers are creating these songs, they're typically going from here all the way to here. And so how do we get from here to here? And what has changed in between these two devices? How people remember certain parts of the games may interfere with how they interpret remastered music. And so we're going to start off with my favorites. How do we get from here all the way to here? Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire version and their remix Pokemon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire version. I'll be referring to them as RSE for Ruby Sapphire Emerald and ORAS for Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. When we look at the composers for both of these games, we're looking at a lot of the same names. So they know what went into these songs when they were first created and how are they going to recreate them. We are going to start off with a fun one. This is the secret base theme from Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald for the Game Boy Advance. The original theme is very homey. It uses Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald's warmer instruments to sing and then trail off with vibrato. So vibrato is when the voice shakes. Oh! The drums are also softer sounding, almost like they were played by their bare hands. If you listen closely, you'll notice that when many of these early Game Boy tunes want to emulate the sound of a snare drum or a shaker, they have to use this abstract white noise compressed air sound instead. The theme is very memorable, very nostalgic, especially when you realize that it was used not only for the secret bases themselves, but also for the town theme of Fortree City. So therefore, when the remakes are coming out, the composers have a choice. Do we play a remaster down the middle like the original and use them as both? Or do we split the song in half, pull each to their polar extremes, and truly characterize the setting in which they're heard? And poof, this song got 2 remakes. It's not the only one, so if you know the other, let me know in the comments. For super secret bases, you'll notice a theme of childishness. Immediately we're introduced to xylophones and music blocks. Those high notes are contrasted by the deep, bassy hum of a tuba. Which characterizes this track as a clumsy, playful child. There's also what sounds like the taps of a triangle to emphasize certain percussion elements in the background. Compare the dynamics of the percussion in this rendition versus the original, which relied on clicks and white noise to evoke the same kinds of sounds. These are all instruments that come out of a child's playpen, and it's designed to make you feel like a child when you're designing your own super secret bases, no matter how old you are. Let's fly to Fortree City, where this song is given the total opposite treatment. We are immediately greeted by a sweet-sounding accordion, I believe, an acoustic guitar that creates these guitar squeaks that you get from a real human's finger sliding down a guitar string. It's something that you couldn't possibly create with a Game Boy sound font. It's so real, it's rustic, it's wooden, contributing to the setting of the song itself, and a soothing breeze that accompanies the setting of a treetop community. Instead of hard percussion, we hear a real hand-shook shaker and these tiny block sounds, as if to resemble the shaking of leaves and rickety wooden walkways respectively. The main melodies have such a sweet harmony. Meanwhile, the finger-sliding bass in the backdrop gives us this swaying motion, as if we are one with the trees themselves. One of the more iconic parts of the melody comes right before it loops. Da, da, da. Instead of just carrying on with the melody and letting it play, everyone, every player, every musician in the song stops what they're doing to help emphasize those nostalgic notes. And then the harmony dips right back into the loop and carries on for another play. With the way that these remakes texturize the setting and relate to the emotions of each environment, it's clear to me that they outperform the originals from the Game Boy. However, remakes are not always better. There are some tracks in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire that, while extremely pristine compositions on their own, do tend to gloss over some elements that made the originals special in the first place. A quick example is the trumpetly triumphant Route 110. In the B section of its first loop, the forward-moving percussion pauses to allow the melody to take the listener to a place of wonder and awe. Dropping the drums here is a deliberate choice that allows the player to breathe in the beautiful vistas, to stop and smell the roses. The remake succeeds in many ways, such as its embellishments on percussion, like using the triangle, and also incorporating a kazoo into the mix. But it totally glosses over that important, breathtaking moment when it keeps the drums happily marching along just as they were before. And just as they will continue to do after. Sometimes we can't help but prefer the original Game Boy sounds to the remakes, and there's a reason for that. The orchestral renditions tend to sound like real-life instruments, as opposed to computer-generated sounds, which generates better quality but also loses some of its identity. The harsh trumpets and sharp stabs of the original RSE soundtrack act as individual characters themselves that we can remember and cling on to, whereas orchestral instruments blend together more easily. The remake of Evergrande City is also a joy to listen to, with a more mature sounding horn that sets the stage at the beginning of the song. It sure does stick to its roots by incorporating bells into the melody, but it seems to misplace them. In the original Game Boy version, one of my favorite parts is in the second half of the A part of the loop, when the horns are just screaming the counter melody in the background. Oras trades these horns for more subdued bells. And therefore, those moments lose the thrill of the originals. A similar thing happens in the Rival theme, which overall I think does a better job at being more rambunctious and exhilarating than the original, but it misses out on a small detail in the beginning of the song. And that hurts. Overall, I think that the Oras soundtrack succeeds in converting the beauty of Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald into a 3D world. And these shortcomings are just examples of how sometimes those special musical moments get lost to the past. But be sure to not sleep on the dramatic, prehistoric pouncing of Oras' legendary battle theme. Which uniquely weaves in the sound font of the original Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald games, creating a hybrid mix that pays such honorable tribute to the legacy of these two legendary Pokémon. And don't forget the bubbly maritime sounds that underscore the new surfing theme. And the other tracks that I find are better than the originals, such as Route 113, the Archie Maxi battle theme, Meteor Falls, and more. I could literally do an entire video just pitting the originals against the remakes for this generation alone. But for now, if you want more content about Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, be sure to visit my gaming channel where I did a whole video on why I think they're the most detailed games in Pokemon history. But for now, let's move on to a couple other examples. Let's take it on to Johto. National Park. This song delivers its vibe immediately. It's low-key, relaxing, but it doesn't waste any time in transporting you to this place, meaning it gets started right away. Going back to this song from its remake in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it goes by so fast it's almost difficult to keep up. Something that you'll notice a minute into this song is that it lacks any drums. That is until the mood of the song strikingly shifts into this funky breakdown with less relaxing notes. It truly does resemble the variation of mood at a national park. You have folks relaxing on picnic blankets and some riding their bikes. I feel like this part of the song is trying to invoke a new sense of discovery or an aha moment. Maybe you see a bug or a bird and you chase after it. Or maybe you start wrestling with a friend or having a catch. And then after that short burst of energy, you get to come back down to earth and relax again. All of this happens very fast in the original when contrasted with its remake. Like many songs in Heart Gold and Soul Silver do, National Park takes creative liberties by adding a piano interlude before reaching the point in the song where its predecessor began. Overall, it walks with a slower tempo than the original, which contributes to the feeling that the song is actually taking you somewhere instead of simply being somewhere. It has a more natural transition into the funky part, but even this remains slow enough to lose the iconic dancing high notes that we find in the original at this part. As to which version is better, I think it's hard to say. You have to look at the context of how each track is incorporated into its setting. The graphics in National Park have a lot more realism in Heart Gold and Soul Silver than they do in the original Game Boy games. So it's very reasonable to suggest that each respective song accomplishes the same thing depending on the setting that you are listening to it in. And now for the big kahuna, the big example that I've been so excited to share with you all this time, is Route 3 from the Kanto region. The original Red and Blue, so minimalistic, but something about those sounds just really gets you. This song is one of the first real feelings of adventure that you get in the whole Pokémon series. Red and Blue establishes the original melody. It is the basis on which to iterate. It is a clean, simple, adventurous melody, and we're going to see how it gets transformed over 20 years. Gold and Silver comes out a couple years after Red and Blue, and the whole idea is that it's 3 years later and you're traveling back to Kanto, so you're visiting familiar places. Gold and Silver tries to emphasize this by making the songs feel a little bit more slower or aged, as if you've already been there before. You can see in the Gold and Silver version that it starts without drums, and they seem to have transposed into a higher range of notes. The background parts stay steady and upbeat to keep the song familiar, but the main melody has these longer, waning notes instead of stabs, making it feel like it's aged. When we go to Fire Red and Leaf Green, the first remakes of the original Red and Blue, everything gets elevated. The potential of the original gets totally expanded. There's generally more layers than were ever possible, and some more arpeggios too. Fire Red and Leaf Green ramp up the excitement, ramp up the adventure, and they create something that just hits you like a bus. More importantly, this track is notable because it adds a refrain to the last part of the song. The final new melody before the song loops had historically played once. And to me, that second iteration, that refrain, if you will, hits me the hardest out of any nostalgic part of that song. I don't know why. I'm sure there's some cosmic, chemical reason. It's a chant-like wave of nostalgia, like a stage performer holding out the microphone after they sing their part and saying, "You know the words, now you sing it this time." And I love that. And what's great about it is that when Heart Gold and Soul Silver come out, they keep it. I definitely feel like Heart Gold and Soul Silver is more like an upright, slower march, whereas Fire Red and Leaf Green would kind of be like leaning forward, Naruto hands back, and running through the wilderness. So now we get to the modern era, and Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee come out. All of these songs, I feel like, were good, but none of them stood out the way that past iterations had. Everything just felt homogeneous with the orchestral sound. These parts of the song that we know so well, I feel like they are all blended in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. And you can still discern them from one another, but they don't have as much character as the past iterations do. These orchestral sounds would rather contribute to the characterization of the piece as a whole instead of standing out on their own. Now, sinfully, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee removes the refrain that I love so much. That last part of the melody before the song loops plays once. It doesn't even give you a chance to hope for it before the loop restarts. However, the removal of the refrain is consistent with the way in which the piece incorporates a constant marching drum and tuba. It's funny how the remakes are typically incorporating these marching sounds to make you feel like you're moving forward somewhere, because that's what these roots do, right? They're trying to get you from point A to point B, not just geographically, but also mentally, and that's what music can do for you. In this version, it never changes that momentum, nullifying the need for that refrain, which originally served to slow down the piece, give you a breath, and drill the melody into your heart. However, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee does succeed in adding a new element on the second loop, which is atypical of these remakes so far. It slows down the second loop not by tempo, but just by how the percussion works. They drop the constant marching band in favor of a more dramatic, slower army chant. But the part of the song which has always touched me the most feels like it's ignored in this piece. Like I mentioned with Fortree City, the song just could have kept going and played those notes like normal and then just continued on with the loop. You don't get the feels when Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee takes out that moment. So if I had to rank these pieces of music, I would do so in the following order. Number 6, Gold and Silver. Number 5, Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Number 4, Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Number 3, the original Red and Blue. Number 2, Fire Red and Leaf Green. Wait. The best iteration of this theme comes from its dramatic rendition of what could only be an already established melody in the Pokémon anime series. Going back to the 90s, looking at Ash's adventure from the very beginning, starting with a very lonely march and slowly adding additional elements, is strongly reminiscent of Ash's own incredible journey that started in Pallet Town. With each musical movement, he gains Pikachu, Brock, and Misty. And what, do you hear that? This track is actually the first to create a refrain out of that final melody before the song loops. It does it twice, and you feel it. After beautifully incorporating the refrain, the orchestra seeks to tie each element in a bow, crashing into a tremendous restart of the loop. And of course we recognize that melody from the beginning of the composition, but remember how lonely it was, just one or two instruments. Now we're hearing the melody again, only with each new element contributing to the triumphant reprise. Guys, I could talk about this all day long, but I'm really happy that I was able to share some of this with you. I hope that it's a testimony to what video games and music can do for our lives, what kind of worlds it could take us to, what kind of magic it can expose us to, and what kinds of inspiration we can find within it. I hope that you are all staying safe and healthy during this time. I'm one of the people that does still have to work, but hopefully with the time I'm forced to stay inside, I can try to bring some more content your way. The next real Chisel This episode is going to be a very special one, but I'm so close, I just have to get back outside to make it work. I hope that's a little clue for what it might be. I hope that you all have a very merry Mat4yo day. Yes, it is my birthday. I'm 24, yo. I'll be celebrating on my own deserted island with my Animal Crossing villagers. I'm Mat4yo, and that's all for yo today.